Hello peoples. It's been a moment since I've made a video, let alone one for keyboards. Since then, I've still been doing the keyboard stuff on my own, albeit a bit slower because of financial constraints and other distractions, not the least of which being work, as well as just not wanting to stress myself too much with the usual creative process and trying to hopelessly achieve perfection. I was hoping to get a dedicated camera before getting this video out, but once again, financial constraints, and I unfortunately didn't look out with my birthday last month, but no complaints about the latter too much. I can't ask for too much there. Lately, the third keyboard renaissance has come around, going somewhere between where the hobby was before the explosion of the hobby and into what I would like to call the PE foam era of keyboards, where the only goal a year or two ago was to stuff keyboards as full as possible, while also including a metric fuckton of flex cuts. That type of customization is still very much alive in the entry point keyboards, but people have been reeling back on that recently, preferring builds that sound better just with the case, PCB, plate, and not much else. The vast majority still need some work done to them, but in my opinion, this is a step in the right direction, where keyboards are made not only visually deliberate, but also sonically deliberate. One mainstay since the explosion of the keyboard hobby, and still to this day, is the fabled Singa Unikorn, a highly sought-after keyboard that uses the resurgingly popular gummy O-ring mount, which itself originated from the OTD 356 Mini, using a silicone ring gasket typically used for large industrial piping, which instead was used to fit the PCB assembly into a case via friction and a couple of standoffs on the edge of the case, providing both a very bouncy, cushioned feel, as well as what people have described as a full and clear poppy sound, rivaled by very few keyboards still to this day. Inspired by this design, designer Kei Katano sought to replicate this design in a much more affordable, easily reproducible design using a one-piece case with a much more conservative internal weight. When on group buy, the Korn is usually sold between $350 to $500, depending on your options, but in the aftermarket, can quickly go up to 4 digits, even in some rare cases going to the $1.5 to $2,000 mark for limited Korns with either custom case engravings or custom weights, sometimes both. Needless to say, don't buy something that expensive on the aftermarket unless you really have that much fuck-off money. From late 2020 and to this day, the hobby is graced with the staple Bakeneko. The Bakeneko was originally kept as an open source project on Keycaps for random users to either 3D print on their own or even manufacture should they be up for the task. In my research, I could only find one proper group buy for the Bakeneko through Breadworks, dubbed the Biscuit Neko by the group buy runner Biscuit, who is also the founder of Breadworks, back in mid-late 2021 with a $169 base price for a CNC'd aluminum case with everything you would normally get with a DIY kit, minus stabilizers and case foam, which were available as add-ons. Otherwise, pretty much the only way since it premiered into the spotlight has been through Canon Key's in-stock options, originally only with the 60, but soon after with the 65 as well, as the community started demanding the layout with arrow keys. These in-stock options for the longest time had the caveat of being cast aluminum rather than CNC, and being either painted or powder coated, making the surface much more prone to damage, scuffs, and factory discrepancies in terms of surface consistency and sometimes even discoloring. With these lesser manufacturing processes and lower quality expectations, what arose is a very affordable keyboard that needs little tampering with several color options, running at about $135 for the 60, $150 for the 65, $135 if that's in B stock as well. Later down the line, a CNC and anodized version of the 65 came out with only a bump to $190 with only 5 color options, however. And this price is still pretty damn good for an in-stock option, but it does still fall behind some of the more modern group buy kits that have gotten as low as $90 for CNC aluminum with ano or E-coating, prominent brass weights, and options galore for parts and accessories. But again, for an always stocked option, the sub $200 is definitely welcome for the only readily available O-ring option. Not to mention, you get their really nice carrying case and are of course sticker bombed by them as most vendors do. Moving on to the actual project itself, in hand I have the regular Bakeneko 65 in Next Gen Lavender, Probably the last of maybe 2 or 3 uncanny keys when I bought it, so perhaps I got lucky on the timing picking that up because shortly after I checked the listing and it was immediately sold out. This build is going out to a dear friend that I've already sent an admittedly cheapo modded out keyboard to that has since been tortured by her devil incarnate mess of a little brother. Hopefully this time this keyboard should withstand that and even create consequences for his actions should he try to mess with this metal keyboard. As usual, always test your PCB before starting the build process in case you run into a defect and can let your vendor know as soon as possible to potentially get a replacement. With the Bakeneko, there is unfortunately no option to change the plate on this keyboard, and finding an aftermarket plate is practically impossible without getting a one-of-one manufactured, and the hot swap is somehow more skimpy than their Brutal 65, which itself is very skimpy with only a split backspace option. Even a stepped caps would have been very much welcome. It's a minor complaint, but I did need to grasp at straws to find something to complain about in the first place, because finding other parts that accommodate the right side blocker is nearly impossible, unlike its smaller 60% brother. Instead, we are stuck with a standard ANSI 65% layout with an FR4 plate, the same fiberglass material used for PCBs, which by no means is a bad option. It's a strong option compared to polycarbonate or POM, which would have been disastrous in a build like this because of the lack of PCB standoffs, but still, it leaves something to be desired. Mainly, I just want aluminum, you know. The build process is dead simple, however, and it's surprising it didn't get much credit at the time of the GMMK Pro that everybody raved as a great entry option, which in reality was a huge disappointment and was anything but entry with how hard it was to enter the inside of the case, with the only rarely matched innovation it included being grooves to friction fit the heat shrink JST cable in place. One thing to note with the build is that you should use clip-in stabilizers rather than screw-ins due to the clearance the clip provides for the O-ring to sit around the PCB, while the threading of the screw-in is far too intrusive. Fortunately, Canon Keys provides cherry clip-ins that in all honesty have become my go-to when I don't feel like shelling out the extra cash for L stabs. A simple light coat of 205D0 on the housing and stems, and a fairly generous coating of that, or your favorite glue-like substance on the wires, and they are nearly flawless, without the need for extraneous mods like the Holy mod. Mine is still a bit of ticking on the right-hand side of the spacebar that even a bit of syringing didn't help much with. It's minor enough given the majority of people hit the spacebar with their left hand. A bit of extra leverage from another tool like tweezers may come in handy for seating them in, as the clips can be a bit stubborn the first few times of putting them in, but it will spare your fingers the sharp pain of tiny plastic bits coming through the PCB. Once the stabilizers are in and tuned, grab your favorite switch. In this case, me being a basic bitch, went with the tried and true Cherry Hyperglide Blacks, spring swapped with 60-gram TX springs, a decent coating of the you-know-what on the stems, and because I had no more Desk Keys films or Novel Keys films, I tried out Wuche PC films, which, with most films, I really don't have much to complain about, so decent option, just like most of them. A long pull switch like a Gatorade cream soda or the, again, tried and true BCP on the spacebar can also make quite a difference on a build like this, as it does become fairly easy to mute the board. Then with the plate, best practice would be to insert a couple of switches onto the corners of the free-floating plate to allow for rigidity when inserting the rest, but I also like to add a few in the middle just to be sure for rigidity, which, again, we want to be absolutely sure of with the lack of PCB standoffs to hold the plate at appropriate distance. Once that's done, mate the switches to the PCB, making sure that you have oriented it correctly with the switches facing south, and simply add the rest. With everything together, take the O-ring, in this case the base 50A durometer O-ring, and stretch it around the PCB plate assembly. There may be a bit of excess protrusion around the spacebar and backspace. This is unfortunately normal, but it does still fit fine into the case with little to no extra struggle. By default, the Bakeneko comes with either a silicone weight or zinc weight, no brass to be found anywhere, which comes pre-installed based on which you order, and as always the option for the other can be bought separately. If you do wish to remove or swap the weight, oddly the kit does not come with the necessary hex 2 bit needed, but only the hex 1 Allen wrench for the Daughterboard, so pray that you have not just 1, but 2 correct screw bits for this build. Silicone usually mutes and dulls the sound out, while zinc will clean up the hollowness and provide that premium feeling weight to the board, but it does still leave something to be desired that a brass or stainless steel weight would easily add the extra oomph for. As mentioned, the Daughterboard, fortunately an AIO3 universal Daughterboard, is screwed in with 4 M2x2mm screws, which again are keyed for hex 1 bits. Absolutely put the JST cable onto the Daughterboard out of the assembly first, as the clearance is just enough that you can take out again, but it is a massive pain. Then make sure when screwing this in to crisscross, starting with barely tightening the screws, then tightening finger tight once all 4 are in, as we do not want to crack this small assembly. With the cable and Daughterboard in and the PCB ready to be seated in, now is the best time to do any miscellaneous mods. For my tastes, I do minimal modding to the Bakeneko, as it does admittedly need them. Following Andy Nguyen's video, I do a layer of tape on the bottom of the base to help deflect a bit of the sound, and a single thin layer of either shelf liner or paper towel to help shape the sound a little bit more towards the poppy end. You can also try PE foam if you must. A bit of polyfilm may also be necessary if you still hear a bit of unfavorable resonance in the case, but absolutely be sparing, as we do not want to compromise the bounce given from the O-ring. For what it's worth, Brian from Bad Seed Tech also experienced no weight whatsoever, being an option for an oddly fuller sound, but of course you do need to counter that with plenty of case filler to reduce the resonance from the one-piece design. If you haven't watched those videos or even those two creators at all, absolutely hit their videos up for some new perspectives on keyboards. You really can't hear too many in this kind of hobby. With that in, make sure to insert the JST cable into the PCB, orienting it such that the pins aren't visible on the cable while seating it in. Now is the part that may feel weird the first couple of times, but now we seat the PCB into the case. Because of that blocker, we need to push the O-ring in, so we start from the bottom and clamshell it there until the O-ring is absolutely bottomed out on the standoffs. Once again, with those aforementioned spots where the O-ring is protruding a little bit, may cause a little bit of interference when seating the PCB in, but as long as you're persistent, it should fit in fine without any issue. Once that's in, we're done and ready to put the keycaps on. This build will be shipped out with nice PBT Noel, a cutesy pastel blue and pink die sub PBT set from Keycaps as well, that I think is greatly complemented by the next gen lavender coating, and is honestly surprisingly really good quality for being a die sub PBT set at its price point. I also managed to pick up a set of Key Kobo white on black and black on white during Novelty's Black Friday Cyber Monday sale, and quite honestly, they are phenomenal for the $60 each I picked them up for. Pretty much 98% of the way to GMK, with some minor details I could tell in just a few minutes, but it is so close that I really can't complain because they're not bad details, just different from GMK. Coming up will be quite a few sound tests with several configurations. One set is the cherries with the Key Kobo double shot ABS, the cherries with the nice PBT die sub, and I even threw in a set of Creamerons to see if they would help with the flatter sound that I got from the PBT, which honestly surprised me, but it does get closer to that foamed out sound more than I would like to be. Other than that, hopefully you enjoy your Christmas present, Rose, and personally I'll be back again hopefully soon, as I would like to kick up some more keyboard content again, including a longer term review of the Brutal 65 I mentioned before, but that will take some time to cook probably. This one I had an urgent need to do because of the holidays.